Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me once again. Yes, it's back, the Nikon Z7ii, and it's got a friend this time, the 70-200 f2.8 Z mount. I want to see how the combination compares to my D850 and 70-200 f2.8 f mount. I don't want to leave any questions or unknowns. As regulars know, I tested the Z-mounted 7200 f2.8 against its FTZ mounted cousin and came to the unpopular conclusion that it's not worth the extra money if you already have a decent F-mounted 7200 f2.8. After all, the FTZ mount is a cheaper option, obviously. Okay, I heard the groaning the first time round and I can hear it the second time round, so here's a second chance. Impress me. Okay, enough of the theatrics. I went through the various camera comparisons in an earlier video, but if you missed them, here's a few highlights, okay? Both have full frame sensors that are 45.7 megapixels. That comes from Nikon. The D850 does 7 frames a second and the Z7ii does 10 frames per second. The dynamic range is virtually identical. Both have ISO options from 64 to 25,600. Both take SD and XQD memory cards. So let's be honest, they're both pretty similar so far. But don't forget that one is a DSLR and the other one's a mirrorless. They are quite different cameras under the skin. And the D850 is using an X-Speed 5 processor, whilst we know that the Z7ii has a dual X-Speed 6. So there's quite a difference there. And there's at least 3 years between both cameras and lenses. Now, I was mega impressed the last time I used the Z7ii, and the D850 has been described as the best all-round camera Nikon's ever made. That's quite a statement, isn't it? Quite a statement. It wasn't even mine. So which will be better at portraits and sporty flying shots? Which feels better to use and which will steal my beating heart and become my studio portrait camera? I'm very dramatic today, aren't I? Let's get on with it. Let's get to the action, because I took both cameras to the wilds of Rutland to meet a man with a golden eagle. Not a man with a golden gun, a golden eagle. I gotta say, I was seriously excited. This majestic bird is one of my all-time favourites, and I will give you details of how you can do this as well, and how I did it, and the details and the contacts, because it's well worth going to photograph these. So I'll do that as we go along and leave the details down below. Of course, I had my trusty Atomos Ninja on the Z7ii, so I can show you the focus and other settings. Obviously, it doesn't work the same with the D850. The mirror's in the way. But we can't hold that against it, can we? No. Anyway, over to the pictures. Now, I confess, I videoed that intro about 6 weeks ago. I was expecting the courier to collect the camera any second when I did that. And so if I looked a bit confused and distracted, I apologise completely. But I tell you what, one heck of a lot has happened since then. The event industry, which I work in, has opened up and brought me loads of well-needed work. And I've had a haircut. Luckily, I made loads of notes at the time, and I didn't lose any images in my previous hard drive debacle. Before I took a single shot though, first job, factory reset, then update the firmware on the Z7ii. I've done a video on that last bit, so if you're unsure how to perform that particular task, check it out. The video's wittily called Classroom Shorts, Nikon Firmware Updates. Oh, genius. So as my earlier me said, let's have a look at the pictures and I'll give my feelings about both camera systems as we go along. Well, the first thing I noticed as I trudged along various fields is that the DSLR is a lot heavier. Before I go any further, I ought to thank a couple of people for the making of this video. John, the man responsible for organising the day, is a lovely, straightforward kind of guy, and he runs a company called Photographers on Safari. And that offers kinds of trips and days out to photographers regardless of their experience. So check them out. He in turn introduced us to a really experienced falconer, Simon, and his stunning golden eagle. There are other birds as well, but I was captivated by the golden eagle. You will find his link down below too. Anyway, back to the cameras. This was the first flight and I was using Auto Area AF with animal tracking. One more flight and I changed to single point focus. The first shot, shutter speed 2000. I'm really impressed with the camera, bearing in mind that these were taken with a mere f2.8. At the time though, I thought I'd give the camera a sporting chance with a little more depth of field. This was, as you can see, f5.6. These were taken in RAW with minimum sharpening and adjustment. Impressed by the sharp eyes and face? I'll tell you what, take a closer look. Do you know, I'm finding it hard to find fault with this focus mode and the camera in general. It seems to be making the job really easy. I honestly wasn't expecting this little camera to be so ridiculously good at capturing movement. And maybe a shout out for the lens as well. I'm shooting manual, by the way, because if you take a reading off the subject, it no longer matters whether you have sky or trees in the background, the exposure should be correct for that subject. I discovered this technique when doing certain dog agility shots and it's coming in really useful here. Time to change from using Auto Area AF with animal tracking to single point focus. This will test both myself and the camera. I hope at least one of us is up to the challenge. Well, the answer is, even with my 3 early shots that were way out of focus, I still managed 2 perfectly acceptable images at the end of the flight. By pre-focusing on the area that I expected to start shooting, I was successful again and again and again. I'm really starting to like this camera. However, there's a couple of things that niggled me. Now, as default, the Z7ii seems to choose auto ISO, and that's not a setting I particularly like. So after a couple of flights, I adjusted it to manual. So I'll show you the video of how to do that. And then we get to job 2. Adjust the ridiculously tough power saving setup. Why do I do that? Well, my chances of missing this crucial shot while the camera slowly rouses itself from its standby mode are ridiculously high. So that has to go. It's preset to power down after a mere 30 seconds. And despite Nikon's assertion that it wakes up quickly and returns to your selected focus point, that's scant reassurance when the object you wanted to photograph has just flown off and landed, all while you were waiting for it to come to life. So my advice to you is switch it off or change it. How, I hear nobody say. Well, I'm going to show you anyway. You open the menu by pressing the suitably named menu button, which is located at the back of the camera, and you scroll down to that little pencil icon. C3 is what you're after, then standby timer, and finally choose which setting suits you best. I personally would head for the minutes selection rather than the seconds if I were you. Now, I know why Nikon has done this. Mirrorless cameras are notoriously heavy on batteries. Being entirely electronic by nature and design, that said, I averaged about 1,000 shots per battery, which is exceptionally better than advertised by Nikon themselves. They say you can only get 360 using the viewfinder and 420 using the rear screen, which somehow seems the wrong way around to me. But anyway, it's not a DSLR though. The D850 claims 1,840. I have a battery grip on mine, which gives me a further 3,300, taking it to a claimed 5,140. If I wanted to do that to Z7ii, I'd use the MD N11 grip at the price of $359. If they're only available, as they're out of stock last time I looked, but it would, of course, let me pack 2 batteries. But hold on, isn't there another way of achieving that? Yes, it's called my pocket. That ingenious little invention allows me to carry spare batteries, and it's far more economically friendly to my bank account. Now, I'm probably being unfair to the MB-N11 because it does allow for hot swapping, or the ability to swap batteries without losing power to the camera, controls for vertical shooting, etc., and as ever makes the camera feel oh so better balanced. Oh so better balanced, is that grammatically correct? It'll do. Anyway, admittedly my poor old pocket comes a poor second against those features, but it's still a cheaper option if you just can't quite justify the cost. Anyway, I digress again. We've seen how the Z7 II has fared using the two focus methods. Time to swap cameras and give the D850 a try, I reckon. As I said before, no video unfortunately, but just look at the images. These are from the first couple of its flights, all impressive so far. Maybe you should compare a few more, but side by side this time. After all, this is supposed to be a comparison. Now, can you tell which camera is which? Both are pretty impressive. How about now? Did that surprise you at all? Okay, time for close-ups. The D850 is definitely softer. This has become a bit of a theme as I zoomed into both sets of images. Don't forget, similar shutter speeds and ISO were used, and the aperture was between f5 and f5.6 on both cameras. Let's look at a couple of portraits. Pretty good quality from both. ISO was around the 200 to 250 mark. There's a little more noise coming from the Z7 II, but nothing to complain about. When I was using the Z7 II for those headshots, I started out using single point focus. I prefer it for my portraits as I can make sure the focus point is on the eye. Previous settings seem to have either opted for the nearest part or the most contrasty. Contrasty, is that a word? Anyway, and I've learnt not to trust them. As we are testing, however, I'll change it to the auto area AF to see if the animal eye tracking picks it up. Yes, I know it's a laborious method I'm using. Okay, here we go. Oh, it's found the eye. But once, and then after that it struggled finding it again. What a shame. But no matter, as I say, I prefer to use single point anyway. Remember at the start I listed the similarities. I said the main difference is those processors. Well, that's not strictly true. There are a couple of considerable differences in the autofocus system. Firstly, the D850 has 153 phase detection focus points, whereas the mirrorless beats that by an utter mile with 493. They work differently too, with the Z7 using a hybrid PDAF. Even more importantly, the D850 has no eye tracking, whereas the Nikon Z7ii obviously does. How good is it? Well, I'll be testing that in a later video. After lunch, we were brought a barn owl. The Z7 II eye tracking had no problem whatsoever with this bird. The focus stayed on the eye and even offered the alternative one, just as the way it's designed to. Now, this could make me lazy, but it allows you more time to think about the composition, etc. Even when the bird looks away, the tracking is back on it almost immediately. Here are the images from both cameras. Which one do you prefer? And now in low light, can you tell the difference yet? The final test with this speedy little kestrel. Now, the only reliable way to capture him in flight is early on, just after he takes off in fact. Here are a couple from the D850. Not too shabby. Now with the Z7 II, I started off using the auto area AF. And you can see by the little yellow box that I had selected focus tracking. You do this by pressing the OK button. The image looks fine. I used the same setup for the second flight, but as you can see, the tracking is no match for the Kestrel. So for a challenge and to match the D850 camera, I changed the setting to single point. I could have changed it using the F2 button, but I don't find it that accessible. And after all, it would have made this video part really boring. So the camera was now set for a couple of flights using single point focus. To be honest, I wasn't confident, but how bad was it? Well, pretty fantastic actually. Both cameras are quite fast to attain focus, but the Z7 II with its Z7200 lens just seems to pip the D850. Time to change to the wide area AF, and I found the camera's sweet spot, as it were. I won't try and say that this is infallible or it tracked the bird throughout its flight, no. But I will say that this setting allowed me more successful shots and gave me the impression that I had somehow more time to get them and the confidence to take them later on in the flight. So, time for some kind of conclusion, I guess. Okay guys, the Z7 II and its 7200 buddy have gone home a very long time ago. I really wanted to say horses for courses and leave the faster flying shots to sports cameras like the D5 or the D6. Except when I got to look at the images on the computer screen, I was astounded. Yes, I took the D5 with me. It goes everywhere with me anyway, just in case. And yes, of course, the flying shots were as good. But are they any better than the D850 or the Z7 II? Well, in truth, probably yes. But for a good £3,000 more, so they should be. It's a sports camera, through and through. And the Z7 II never claims to be that. Apart from on Nikon's website, where they seem to have a very unhealthy obsession with cowboys being sprayed with rather grubby looking water. Anyway, the Z7 II is designed to be far more at home doing landscapes and portraits, and that's what I'd use it for. That's what I use my D850 for. The D850 apparently allows me to own the art of movement in a commercial sports at a whole new level of epic. I'm not making these phrases up, honestly. Check them out for yourselves. That lot aside, it's back to the real world and practicalities. And I guess one of the questions I've got to ask myself is, would the Z7 II give me better images for the £500 to £1,000 more that it would cost me against the D850? Well, as far as action's concerned, yes. But would I use it for that, seeing as I already own a couple of D5s? The focus options are absolutely great compared to DSLRs. And as I've shown, they can give you so many alternatives. But I have said before, the camera shouldn't be defined by focus tracking. But to counter that, we all like choices. It's such a dilemma, isn't it? Video is brilliant on my Z6 II, so the Z7 II has to be as good, if not better. And the focus tracking, to be honest, is so bad in the D850 that for me it's virtually unusable for video. Well, unless I sit there like this, of course, like I did at the beginning. And now I'm really like this. Anyway, let's cut to the chase. This is going to go. And this has got a new baby brother to play with. Now, as far as the lens is concerned, yes, the Z7200 f2.8 was a fantastic lens, but I still maintain it's too expensive to buy when I've already got all the lenses that I have. And I can use the FTZ. Anyway, that's the end. Join me next time when I'll be taking the Nikon, the Canon R6 for a test drive. You don't want to miss that, do you? Thank you so much for joining me. If you like it, press the like button. And I'll tell you what, if you really liked it, you know what I'm going to say? Just do it. Just press that subscribe button. What does it cost you? And you don't want to miss that Canon R6 test, do you? Okay. Take care. Thank you for joining me. See you soon.